No, they lost.
They did. I haven't. Once the Bills beat the Dolphins, I stopped watching. I wanted to keep watching, and I was like, since the Bills beat the Dolphins, I might as well pull for the Bills because I have friends who were Bills fans. So who did they lose to?
The Bengals.
Oh,
yeah,
Bengals. Is that's Burrows? Joe Burrow?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's a cool story, I guess. I don't really care anymore.
I don't really care at all. Ever.
At all. No, you're a fan because you have all the swag.
I do have all the swag. Yeah. I'm like one of those Christians who, I don't know, like a lifestyle Christian who has like the scripture in my Insta bio, but don't ever go to church or interact with anybody or ever read my Bible.
That's right. You're a cultural Bills fan.
We're recording right now. I shouldn't have said that.
So don't leave this in? Okay.
No.
All right. Hey, Worship Leader, welcome back to the channel. This is Spencer Cormany. You know him well because he's been on here several times. But in case you've never heard of him, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you? Where can we find you?
My name's Spencer Cormany. I run a YouTube channel / website called Leading Worship Well, where I teach worship leaders how to lead themselves well, lead their church well, and lead worship well by providing practical worship leading tips. That's
good. Katie just said to me the other day, she was like, you need like a better 15-second spiel.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
I've crafted that one over my 4 or 5 years in leading worship well. So.
I like it. Yeah, it's a very good resource. I benefit from the resource. I have over the years, and I continue to. I just downloaded your...
I saw your name popped up. My five things to say this Sunday, or worship speaking transitions to use this Sunday.
Yep, and I've also I led my team through the worship devotionals. And so, anyways, go check out his stuff, leadingworshipwell.com. But on your YouTube channel, you've been doing a segment at least, or are the full episodes called this? I don't know, but
I'll call it an episode. Yeah.
Episode. Okay. Real talk. So he's been having these topics and just answering them. And so today he's coming on the channel to surprise me as we talk about, I've never heard these topics, never heard these questions that are going to come up. So he's just going to, like you said, worship leader comes to you up on the street and asks you these crazy questions.
In the Real Talk episodes, worship leaders send in questions for me. Here's another quick 15-second spiel for Real Talk. Real Talk is where I get real questions from real worship leaders and give them real answers.
So I need to do a coaching consultation to give me.
Yeah, I'll help you craft your powerful statements or something.
I need to craft those powerful statements. So
people send me in questions, and I was telling Jimmy before the call that I don't really look at them. Like, I look at them enough to figure out what episode I want to put them in, but I don't think about them beforehand. So I told Jimmy I had 3 questions for today, and that he could look at them if he wanted to, but he didn't. So that's good.
I did not. So let's hear him. What's the first one?
So the first question is titled, I have to kick my pastor's wife off the worship team. It says this. It says, I have a problem. The head deacon of the church, who also had a hand in hiring me, sings on my praise team. But he sings off-key about 30 to 40% of the time. I've presented him with some exercises to work on, and he took that well, but it's still off. The other thing is, in the summertime, he sings up in front of the worship service in a pair of shorts and flip-flops. I'm all for casual. I just don't think that shorts and flip-flops are what you stand up with in front of a service. I don't want to be let go, but I mean, how many of these things am I going to tell this person about? Let's add to that the other fact that the pastor's wife wants to sing with us as well and has gotten up 4 times. I don't think she can sing on key either. Even with exercises, it wouldn't help. Yeah, it's the pastor's wife. What do I do?
Oh my goodness! I'm having a bunch of thoughts. I was trying to jot them down because you know how
it's too fast. So they have a deacon on their team, the head deacon who hired them, and they are horrible at singing. And they also have the pastor's wife on their team who can't sing. Yeah, it's the pastor's wife. They said.
Yeah, it's the pastor's wife. Man, that's tough. I mean, I guess, I've been in churches where deacons are more like what at our church are like elders. So maybe that's
what this sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah. It carries a lot more weight. So it's like an elder that you need who hired you. And, okay. So my first thing, and I know you have a lot to say about this too, but I think an audition process vets who is allowed on your worship team. But that sounds like we could talk about that a little bit that would avoid this, but it sounds like he's already passed this. This deacon was already on the team, so he got grandfathered in. And I had a little bit of that as I came to the church I'm at, but I re-auditioned everyone. So that and it was kind of a way, I didn't want to scare everybody, but I was like, this would be a good way for me to get to know you, find your strengths and weaknesses, and figure out, what you have to offer and just get to know you. And that's how I re-auditioned everybody. And then that allowed me to, make some changes. So that's what I would have done, but we're past that. We're past that now. That does not apply to this person.
So when you re-auditioned people, because I've heard people talk about that before, did you end up having to remove anybody from the team?
I was very slow. I was also new to the church, so I was trying to figure out. I didn't think of it so much as I just need to cut people who aren't good enough. It was kind of like figuring out what do I have to work with at this new church, because I didn't know. I was coming from a bigger church that was, hate to use the word, but maybe more professional. Ooh,
a bigger pool of musicians to pull
bigger
from. So,
pool. Yep. A lot of talent. So I didn't know what I was getting into, and it was, smaller church, and it wasn't the same, but at the same time, we have a lot of really talented people. So I was just trying to figure that out. And, I did not cut anyone at that time because we didn't have a lot to go through. There was a couple people, one in particular, I know this person is not watching this video anyways, but, who it was someone who played a stringed instrument, and I was calling out Nashville numbers during the thing, just because during rehearsal, that's just what I was used to doing, and I didn't even probably poor planning on me. I didn't even say what I was doing, and after rehearsal, he's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
This guy likes to count.
Why is he calling out numbers? And I was like, oh, that's something not everyone knows. That's right. Yeah, I need to teach that. I was like, we're tagging, go to the 6. I kept saying it, but instead of the guy telling me in rehearsal, probably because he's embarrassed, I don't know, he didn't say anything, and he missed the 6 every time on that tag, and I was just like, what is the problem? Anyways, that person faded himself out of the band, and he said, I'm just not really up to it. He said, I filled in because there was a need, but it's not really my passion, and I can tell I'm not really, the talent level is not really there. So I was like, oh, I'll work with you. I tried to, get him to stay or whatever, but it was fine. It was not a bad thing at all. So that's kind of how that went. So to answer your question, I didn't really cut anyone. That's just, it allowed me to get to know everyone. And then from then on, my auditions were like, hey, I would like to work with you. I'm not ready to put you on stage yet. That's how I go about not allowing someone on the team just yet.
So that is if you can re-audition people.
Yes.
But what do you do? And I know that a bunch of people are stuck in this situation where it's like, usually it's in your case, or they just haven't, it's in your case where they come into a church and there's people on the worship team who shouldn't be on the worship team, or it's somebody who just was like, those people who are really nice and they're like, we got to let everybody on the worship team. And then 3 years down the line, they're like, uh-oh, I shouldn't have done that because now I just have problems. So what is your advice on that? What would you do if you have let somebody on your worship team who shouldn't be on there because of musical skill?
Yeah, there's so much that my thoughts are going. I've built a lot of trust, and I trust my lead pastor to give me feedback when it's needed, and he really trusts me. But that's also not true of everywhere. And so I think the older I get, the more lenient I'm becoming of saying, these are the people who really my job is to lead songs, pastor these people through music. And if this particular body of believers has this level of talent or this style that maybe not me, this is kind of like a preface. Then I've become even more lenient in saying, that's fine. I'm just getting these people to sing to these people. And so that's one thing I just want to say before. I used to be a little bit more direct and more strict, like, hey, this isn't cutting it. Your vibrato is too much. That's not what we want. That's a specific example. And then like I have a lady on my team, Ashley, if you're watching, she has very strong vibrato. And at first I was like, hey, if you want to fix this, as if it was a problem. And I didn't mean to come across that way. I was just like, more modern singers have less vibrato. But then it came down to where I was like, one day I was like, there are people in the church who probably enjoy the vibrato in her voice more than I do. And who's, it's a different style. And I'm not making a Jimmy band like I used to kind of think so, like, well, it needs to kind of match our style. And our style was my opinion. And so this isn't getting into the off key part yet. We'll get there, but I just wanted to say this first. I've become more lenient. So I'm passing on that wisdom to like, hey, you are your job is to get these people to sing to themselves. And you're a part of that. And don't be as harsh as I once was. Okay. So there, that's out of the way. Now someone's on your team and they're singing off key. What are some practical things you can do? I would say start recording your services. That's something you can do. Before that, you got to create a culture where you are the leader, where you're that coach. Alex from Worship Ministry Training, he said it really well.
You never say his last name because you don't know.
Alex,
it's Enfiedgen.
Enfiedgen, yes. I almost had it. I was on the phone yesterday with somebody mentioned it, and I said it. So I do have it locked in, but sometimes it escapes me. But he said from the beginning, and I was like, yeah, that's really good. I think I do this, but he put good words to it, where you want to create, like in the audition process, that coach to mentor relationship from the beginning so that it's not weird for you to give feedback and critique. And if you are stuck in a situation like someone's been there, start that process, start building that trust. It may take a while to build the trust to where you can talk to this deacon and this pastor's wife, but creating that coach to mentor culture, then you can do things like record the service and have these like, I'm trying to think, if I was in that situation, I was brand new, I would start creating like, hey, we want to pursue excellence, undistracting excellence. And here's some ways I think we can do this. We're going to start recording our services, and I'm going to critique myself, even how I speak and how I pray. I want us to hear and listen together how we come across, how we sing. And then you can maybe do it in a group, or you can do it one-on-one and say, hey, you're really singing off key. Did you notice that here? Rather than like, if you don't have something recorded, then it's kind of like, no, I sing perfectly fine. You must be hearing it weird. And you kind of have to have some objective thing, but you got to be super careful that it's not like, I have the evidence and I'm here to accuse you. So there's like all this nuance that you'd have to know going into it. So you have to build trust, but that's the first step. Do you have something?
Yeah, I think to add to that, this is something that I've done with my teams, and I don't really struggle with people musically on my team because I built my team from the ground up. So I had that audition process in place where I didn't get people on my team like that. But when people listen to themselves, I think that they are automatically critical of themselves, probably even more than you are critical of them, because they want to sound as good as possible. And so I think all it takes sometimes is just for people to hear themselves. And I know I've done this with my team before, where we've listened back to a recording of a song that we've done, and I might even have something in mind where I'm like, the keyboard player is playing something that's like muddying the sonic sound or something, and that's what I'm thinking in my head. And they're like, I play the recording of it, and then I tell them beforehand, like, I want you to listen to your part and hear how you mesh with the other instruments. And then afterwards I ask them, okay, what did you hear? And usually, like, that simple question, the keyboard player will be like, I was not playing the right chords in this part of the song, or my tempo was off in this part of the song. And it's like, I wasn't even thinking about that, but they went a step deeper, criticizing themselves, because that's our human tendency, is to listen to ourselves whenever we're listening to recordings. So my point in saying that is that if you just start with recording your services and listening to like one song at your next worship rehearsal with your entire band, not singling out anybody, just like Jimmy just talked about, and you say, I want you to listen to yourself and see how you mesh with the other instruments in the bands. We're talking to everybody in the band who's doing this. Then at the end, they will criticize themselves and get better. Like, I would say like at least 75% of the time. I know that there's some people who are completely tone deaf and they're like, I can't even hear that I'm singing off key. But I think most people with a little bit of musical skill will be able to hear that they're singing off key.
And I'm having I've been thinking about doing this anyways at my church. So the only recording I had was YouTube that we stream to. But it's not exactly the same mix that comes from the board. So I've actually requested that I get the mix from the board so I can hear how my loops are, meshing with the rest of the band, because I can't really hear when we have in-ears. I create my own mix, but that's not necessarily what's happening out in the house. And so we have a document, like we try not to keep our full service up on YouTube. I think after a couple of days, they'll take down the full service, they'll make it unlisted, and then they'll just put up the sermon. But they'll keep a document with the links of the full service. So I used to send those out regularly, and I just sent them out. Like, hey, if you want to hear yourself, the best form, and I just taught how good it is for you to go back and listen to yourself. But I think maybe to take that a step further, especially at the beginning of a year like this, you could say, hey, I want you to, so that this isn't a group thing, you're not singling anybody out, it's sent out to the whole group, but they listen to it on their own, and you make everyone say, hey, I want you to listen to some of your parts and respond with something that you heard, whether it's a negative or a positive that you thought you did well. Just make it, and that at least maybe gets them listening to it. And then, like you said, they usually will take it further. So that might be something that I could even start doing.
So to sum up what we talked about, to answer this question, I like what Jimmy said about, first of all, building relationships with these people on your team, because if you're worried that you're going to get fired when you talk to the head deacon, you probably don't have a very good relationship with them. Or if you're worried that when you talk to the pastor's wife, the pastor's going to be mad and make your life horrible in church, then you probably don't have a very good relationship with them. So work on building that relationship, and then use that relationship to do the things that we talked about where you can help them improve. That's where I would start. I would not start with, hey, you're off the team. You need to not be on here anymore. Always try to fix the problem before you just kick somebody off the team.
I very much agree.
All right. Should we move on to the second question?
Yeah, let's do.
This one is entitled, My Team Looks Like They're Constipated and They're on Ninja Warrior when they lead worship.
Ooh.
It goes like this. How do you go about teaching / helping your vocalists to learn better stage presence? We have some incredibly talented singers, but a few of them have awkward stage presence. One of them looks like he's constipated the whole time. One of them looks like a sociopathic statue. One of them looks like they're auditioning for a show that's a combination of The Voice and Ninja Warrior. We just want to help them grow in that area. So how do you do it? We have live stream footage we can use, but I'm curious how to go about saying, hey, watch yourself here and work on not looking like this. Like, how do you offer critique without sounding superficial or overly critical when it comes to this? Stage presence is incredibly important when it comes to leading others in worship, but I think for me, it's just been the years and hundreds of services I've led that's helped me, blah, 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 blah. How do I help them?
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of what we said, and this may spill over, let's not spend too much time on what we just said. You got to build trust with your team to be able to have these conversations. So let's just get to some principles about stage presence that I think will apply. It sounds like when he said American Ninja Warrior and The Voice, he's got some people who are very stoic, or, and then you have, I'm guessing the American Ninja Warrior, they usually come out and they do flips and stuff and they're like, hey, I'm here. Is that?
I was thinking like the worship chop for some reason. Have you ever seen that? Did you ever see that movie?
I mean, I've seen it with like the Seminoles. That's the thing. But
no, there's something called the worship chop. Wait.
I mean, I've seen some where there's like a football throw too. It's like, yeah. So I think in my context, so we're talking context here, I usually have more of not the football throwing, hatchet chopping people. It's usually the people that look like inside they're probably happy, but they look like the sociopathic statue, I guess is what it was. And even myself, I am not very, when I get, when the lights are in front of you and you're thinking about a lot of things, the first thing to go is your smile, because you're starting to think. So your face drops and you don't realize it. And people's resting face looks mad most of the time. So that's the first thing I tell people every single Sunday. I was like, remember to smile. And I make it, I'm looking at everybody, I'm smiling real big, especially they're like, So it's like a thing I talk about. But I usually give this example of how, you go to a Broadway play or off Broadway, whatever, and you see this play and it looks amazing. And maybe it's right after the play or during the intermission, you get to meet some of the cast. And when you see them up close, their makeup is overly done. It's very dramatic and it looks bad in person, and I've done some acting before, and they make your makeup and I'm like, oh, I look terrible looking in the mirror. But then you see it on video and you're like, oh, it looks normal. You have to add that extra 10, 20, whatever percent when you're on stage just to be normal from stage. Okay. So the same kind of applies with some of us who struggle with being too stoic on stage, that we need to give a little bit extra and push and get out of our comfort zone just to look normal on stage. And I've watched videos of myself, which there's another tip: record the live stream, which he already said he does that.
Correct.
But that would be, yes, do that and make people watch themselves again, just like they are listening to themselves. And I've done this to myself, where I thought I was raising my hand and being super expressive. Then I go back to watch it and I'm like, and inside I felt like I was throwing the football. So, it just didn't translate like I thought. I was like, man, I need to push myself even more just to look like I'm not frozen up there. So that's for those people. Then for the people who are hatchet chopping, throwing the football, whatever, American Ninja Warrior flips on stage, there's got to be a way to dial that back. So going back to a phrase I mentioned on the first question, which is we pursue undistracting excellence. So we want to have this excellence, but it also has to be undistracting. And usually we're talking about notes or whatever, but it also applies to stage presence, that if it's becoming distracting, then it's part of the problem. So if you've built trust, you've built that coaching relationship we've already talked about, then when you watch these videos or live stream together, you could even go about it like maybe just showing, like if I'm just talking to this one person, I'm trying to be pastoral in nature and caring and trying to show them that maybe they're going a little bit over the top. I might even, maybe this is my non-confrontational, so we may have different answers here.
Do you consider me confrontational?
Yes. They maybe like comparing, just say, hey, we have a lot of people on stage, and I love your energy and your enthusiasm, but compared to some of the others, which I'm trying to bring them up, and you're a little over the top, I want to try to even it out so that we are leading the people of the church and not distracting, because having this extreme on stage is a little distracting. I don't know how I go about saying that, but that's the message I would want to try to convey if I had a good relationship with someone, and hopefully they'd be like, oh, I get that.
So
Hopefully.
I think what I hear in your answer, and I don't know if you actually defined it, so I want you to define it, but like, okay. I think you were getting at like, what is the purpose of having stage presence? Because I think that you're like, you're thinking about it from that, but I'd love to hear your answer of like, what is the purpose of stage presence? If it is important, why do we need our team to have it? Yeah. And then how do we use that to guide what stage presence means and looks like?
So I learned from another worship leader that we are all worship leaders on stage.
I've heard that.
Yeah, you've heard that. And so stage presence goes into that leading. And so I view stage presence as you're kind of like the thermostat, not the thermometer, of the temperature of the physical engagement in the room. So what is perceived on stage lets the congregation know what's acceptable in that moment. And we want them to be as free as they can be to match their expressions with the words that they're singing. So when we say we want to lift our hands, maybe that comes up in a song and everybody's going like this, we're making each other like be untruthful with our words, and so we need like an appropriate response to the things that we're singing. And so our stage presence should lead our people, just as our voices do, should lead our people into what is appropriate in that moment. And so if you have someone who's over the top, and this is all context too, because you go somewhere where everyone's over the top, to you, it may be fine in that context. That's fine. I think it was in this particular question, you got some people are extremely in one, extreme in the other. And so trying to bring this middle ground of, okay, and that's something I would teach them, is like, we want an appropriate response, appropriate may be different no matter where you are in your context, but whatever you decide appropriate is, I think you need to be clear on that. I don't know if I need to get as specific as when I say you need to be clear on what's appropriate. I don't know if I would say like, I only want you to raise one hand here. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about like the culture of what it feels like in your area. At our place, it's not appropriate to wear hats. It's not appropriate to take your shoes off. We've had people have a problem when some people took their shoes off, and I had to try to explain this, and they didn't get it, and they're not at our church anymore. It was just one of the things they didn't like. Well, I've been some places where it's like taking your shoes off is completely fine. I've led worship like that back in the olden days where I would take my shoes off, and that was appropriate there. And I think another thing I think about is like approaching your worship ministry and your church kind of like a missionary does, where you're coming into this context that you may not be fully aware of, and you're learning like what is appropriate here, what will offend, what will not, what will distract, what won't, and find that base and then lead your people to that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the way that I would rephrase it, I'm saying the same thing that you said, but and I actually just did this, now that I think about it, I just did this with my team last worship rehearsal because we were going through, Jimmy mentioned it before, so I'll mention it, my devotional that I wrote called We Are All Worship Leaders. And in that, I think it's week number 5 is about modeling worship, essentially. I forget the title of the chapter, even though I wrote it. But, it's when we are worship leaders, others look to us for guidance. And so it opened up this conversation for me and my worship team after we read that. One of the discussion questions after that devotional is, what do we want worship to look like in our church? Like when we look out from the stage on Sunday, what do we hope that we see our people doing? And I think that that question will help you understand in the context of your church, like you said, because different worship teams are going to have different answers of what they think is appropriate. But asking that question to your team helps reveal what you want worship to look like in your church. And then it becomes an easy conversation to say, well, if we want worship to look that way in our church, people aren't just going to do that all of a sudden. They need an example of what that looks like. So let's model it for them. So like at my church, Jimmy, just like at your church, we aren't like this super expressive church necessarily. So when I asked that question to my team, the main thing that they said is like, we want to see people engaging in worship by verbally singing. Like that was a summary of what they said. Like we still look out on Sunday mornings and sometimes people are just standing there looking. So how do we model that for them? And the stage presence improvement that our team decided we need to work on. By the way, this wasn't just me telling them. This was them discovering it by themselves, which I think is more powerful than me just telling them what to do. They said, I need to be singing whenever I'm leading worship. And I looked over at my keyboardist this Sunday, and she was talking about during worship rehearsal how she finds it hard to sing and play at the same time. But I looked over on Sunday, and she was singing and playing at the same time because we had just talked about it during our worship rehearsal. And so I think an action step for anybody who needs help with stage presence is to ask your team at your next rehearsal, what do we want worship to look like in our church? And then the secondary question is, how do we model that this Sunday? Not like over this year, how are we going to implement these small steps? But like, no, like, what are we going to do? Like one thing that we can do this Sunday for my team, it was singing while we're leading. It's going to be something different for your team maybe, but just ask that question and help people discover the answer on their own.
I love it. That's good. Discovering on their own. Yeah, that's powerful. And I'm sitting here trying to think, like, that's probably when the biggest changes happened in my ministry is when like people come along, or I've done a workshop and, brought them along in the process. Like, how do y'all think we can do this better? And people start coming in, and it's more of a team thing, building that relationship rather than just me saying, you need to do this. Because sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. Even if they really want to do it, some people are just wired to not accept, right off the bat, not accept good critique. And then they'll come back and say, yeah, you were right about that. I'll work on that. But their initial reaction will always be, no, the way I'm doing it's right, because that's the way I'm doing it. So you just got to learn how to bring your team along. Yeah, I agree. All right.
Good. I think we've answered that question. We have one other question. I never like to say final or this is the last question in the video because
people click off. They don't
people
want to know.
click
This
off.
is the
They
best
don't want-
one.
This is probably the most important one. Stick around till the end. This one is titled "The Worship Leading Win." The question is simple. Music ministry is one of those things that is hard to quantify success or failure. So, what do you consider a win in your worship ministry? What measure do you use to know if any given service was a success? How do you know? So the question is, how do you know if you've succeeded or not on a Sunday morning?
Yeah, that's good. So we're just talking about that. Claire, because my mind was going different places, but we're talking about Sunday morning.
I think we're just talking about Sunday morning success. How do I know I've succeeded on Sunday morning?
Yeah, so we can't, let's say what it's not. I would say success is getting through and not playing any wrong notes on one hand. But then there's been services where we play wrong notes, I sing the wrong words, but people come up and just say how much they were moved that Sunday and God spoke to them through those lyrics. And I'm like, what? We ruined the whole thing. So that can't be it. I mean, there is success. Like if you're trying to work with your band to be better musicians, there is a layer of success there. But I think we have to zoom out past some of that. So like, other things that it can't be is just transitions with the production team and the lights and the mics coming on. We want that undistracting excellence, but we're all volunteers. We make mistakes. So that can't be the ultimate success. I think what we have to think about is why are we there? What is our biggest role? If nothing else happened, what needs to happen? What is the church, the gathered body, supposed to be doing in this moment? And my job is to help lead the singing portion of our worship gathering. We worship through prayer, we worship through the reading of God's word, and we worship through singing. That doesn't necessarily even mean music. That could just be a cappella. So I think people singing truth of God's word is the success. If people were singing, if you've done something so special and different to where everybody is just staring, even if you hit all the right notes, I would not say that's success for the day. I think God's people singing over each other and to God in worship is the ultimate success. Everything else is supporting that. And if it starts distracting from that, then you're no longer succeeding.
I love it. Because that's, I like how Jimmy succeeded. He passed the test. I love how people answer things different ways, but I think, once again, we're getting at the same heart of it, because I agree. If we want to know how to win at worship leading, then we have to know what the goal of worship leading is, and it's not something that Jimmy or I or any other worship leader makes up. It's what the Bible tells us about what the people of God are supposed to do when they gather together. It's not like the production was really good, because the Bible doesn't talk about that. That might be a sub-goal that supports the main goal of us gathering together, and it has implications on the main goal, but we can't just use that as the criteria to decide whether we've succeeded or not, because the Bible doesn't talk about that. And so what does the Bible talk about? What do we do whenever we gather together? And Jimmy was getting at this as well. The way that I would put it is that our goal when we gather together is to glorify God and to edify the body. Those are our two goals, and they aren't separate. We can't succeed if we do one of them and not the other one, because they're both essential. They are the purpose of our worship gathering. And so, number one, there's a vertical relationship between us and God. And when I say us, it's not just one-on-one, like Jimmy's in the same room that I'm in, and his pastor's over there, and somebody else and his wife and kids are in another part of the worship space, and like we're all having our one-on-one time with God, and then we're glorifying God, but we're all having our own personal worship times. Like, we are gathered together as the church, and so even in our vertical relationship with God in worship, there is a corporate aspect to it, because it is no longer just the individual worshiping God. It is the body of God gathered together to worship him. So even in our vertical relationship in corporate worship. There is still a corporate aspect with the people around us. To add to that, there's also a horizontal aspect, which is the edifying part, where we not only are focused on God as his body, as the church, but we are also focused on the other members of the church during our gathering. And so that means that we teach and admonish and exhort each other through psalms, spiritual songs, and hymns, like Paul talks about, letting the word of Christ dwell in us richly. And then we do that. So, biblically speaking, that is the purpose of our worship gathering. So we can ask ourselves, I think, was God glorified and were the people of God edified? And we don't need to complicate it any more than that. I think we get like really hard on ourselves whenever we're like, this went wrong and this went wrong and this went wrong. And if we don't have the objective of glorifying God and edifying his people, then we're going to be confused about whether we've succeeded or not. So it's back to the question. Music ministry is one of those things that is hard to quantify success or failure. I disagree with the premise. I don't think it's hard.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to identify what success or failure looks like for people who don't know what success or failure looks like. But once we have identified it, then it's not hard to quantify. Was God glorified? Were the people of God edified?
Yes. I think, that's very true. I like it, what you said.
Would you?
I had some thoughts, and then I was listening to your last bit, and I was like, I don't know if there's anything I need to add here. That was really good. I like the way you laid it out very simply.
I have it laid out because I've been working on a workshop for worship teams about what corporate worship is supposed to look like. So I don't just have all this information in my head. I guess I do now, but I've spent like the past month like really thinking about this, and that obviously doesn't mean that I'm right, but this is why it's in my head right now.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, I had nothing to add.
Good. I like it. Well, that's a lot of wisdom. I think if we were to do a soft recap of all those three questions, build trust with your team, build trust with your leadership. See, in my case, I don't have leadership on my team. So that one special question, that's definitely both of them. And then create that coach to mentor relationship. And then you can, that once you have that like base, then you can do a lot of things. And once you built that trust, even when you make mistakes as a leader and come across harsh, people are more forgiving. But if you haven't built up that trust tank, then you have nothing to draw from. And then, yes, remember what we just talked about, what the win actually is. And I think that helps me a lot on days where I don't feel very well. I can't sing. I've lost my voice this month, or, man, the band just screwed up royally. Like, the transitions were bad. At the end of the day, did people worship God? Was glory given to God? And were people edified, encouraged? Did they do that? Did they sing? And if I can answer yes to those, I'm like, then I can rest that God will do with it what he plans to do with it, and I don't have to stress about it. And guess what? Another week's coming right around the corner.
Yes. And
Yes.
just to add to that last question, because I just thought of this, but like I think a lot of people identify the win as like, I felt God's presence in this moment. And sometimes I felt like God's presence was in the room, and sometimes I didn't. And it's like, well, God is omnipresent. So he is everywhere. You don't have to question whether he was in the room or not. That's why it's not subjective. That's not why sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Like, you can win every single week if you make sure that he is glorified and the people are edified. It's not a feeling. It is an objective standard. God glorified, people edified.
Love it. Well, if you want more of this good, I'm not joking, this wisdom from Leading Worship Well, go subscribe to his channel. Follow him on Instagram. You doing stuff on Instagram? There's some value over there.
I put some stuff up there, yes.
That's right. But go visit the website because you got some deals on some good resources over there as well. So definitely go do that. Like this video if you did, which I know you did because it was full of good stuff, and share it with someone. And we'll see you in the next video.